Kstovo, Russia is on fire. Massive strikes hit local oil refineries. Counteroffensive. The Ukrainian armed forces are driving the enemy out of Stepnohirsk. The city is under Ukrainian control. Putin is offended by Xi. Russian drones attacked a Chinese merchant ship. Putin's bunker is being reinforced. Defense Minister Fedorov presented Ukraine's first 250-kilogram guided bomb. The winner of Eurovision turned out to be a Zait supporter, and Kirkorov helped her prepare her number. Belarus is conducting nuclear weapons tests. Putin persuaded Lukashenko to join the war. Russians are openly urging soldiers to lay down their arms and return home. The end of the Russian economy? The US is preparing a new devastating round of sanctions against Russian oil. A bankrupt businessman seized the throne in the Hermitage and threatened everyone with knives. The so-called head of the occupation administration of the Skadovsk district in the Kherson region took a Ukrainian drone to the face. Republicans are preparing a coup and want to declare Trump mentally unfit. An arrest of Olena Zelenska is being prepared in Buenos Aires. Meanwhile, Russian propaganda is shocking with an unbelievable fake. Russia is deliberately redirecting Ukrainian drones onto NATO territory to provoke a conflict between the EU and Kyiv. A deputy resigned because it turned out he had acted in porn films. Kabaeva is rejoicing. All sanctions have been lifted from Russian gymnasts and they are allowed to compete under the tricolor. Hello, my name is Katerina Nestorenko, and right now the main news. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. More wonderful news from across the border. On May 18th, Russia was on fire again. This time, things were heating up in Kstovo, Nizhny Novgorod region. Russian media reported that there was a drone attack. The likely target was the local oil refinery or the Gorky oil pumping station. And more good news. The so-called head of the occupation administration of the Skadovsk district in the Kherson region, appointed by Russia, Alexander Dudka, was wounded after a drone attack. This was reported by Seldo, the governor of the occupied part of the Kherson region. According to him, Dudka was hospitalized with a shrapnel wound to the head and injuries from a mine explosion. Meanwhile, the General Staff confirmed a series of strikes on several important facilities of the Russian occupiers on the 17th and during the night of May 18th.
On the 17th and during the night of May 18th, 2026, units of Ukraine's defense forces struck a Grachanok-class anti-sabotage boat near Kaspisk. They also targeted enemy UAV control points in several districts of Donetsk, Kharkiv and Zaporizhzhia regions, as well as the village of Karnatnaya in the Bryansk region of the Russian Federation. A communications hub in Mirny, located in the temporarily occupied territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, a Tor M2 air defense system in Zapadnoye on the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region, and a train carrying fuel and lubricants in Fedorovka on the temporarily occupied territory of Donetsk region. The Yeysk airfield in Russia's Krasnodar Krai, a Ka-27 helicopter and a B-200 maritime patrol aircraft were destroyed. An airspace control station in Lesnoy, Bryansk region, Russia. Strikes were carried out against enemy personnel in Podobnoye, Donetsk region and in Olgino, Kherson region.
Well, what can I say? I always definitely enjoy the news when Russia is burning, exploding and blazing. Like if you agree. Reading the comments on the previous episodes, I see that many of you watch us from Europe, Kazakhstan, Moldova and even the USA. We Ukrainians are grateful for your support and proud to have such sensible viewers. Write in the comments under this episode which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments, and in the meantime, we continue. Next up is the most interesting part. And now to the news from the front. Stepnohirsk is once again under the control of Ukraine's defense forces. This was reported by the main intelligence directorate, HUR. Fighters from the special unit Artan carried out a series of assault operations in the Zaporizhzhia direction, as a result of which Ukrainian troops drove Russian occupiers out of fortified positions in the city. Key locations have come under the control of the defense forces. Ukraine has developed new drones with artificial intelligence that can analyze facial contours. This was reported by Russian military correspondents. According to them, thanks to this, the new Ukrainian UAVs can now automatically adjust their attacks and work more effectively against the occupiers' personnel. And next, yet another heartfelt outcry from across the border. Russians are asking the military to come home and deal with the anti-people government. A video has appeared on social media in which a Russian claims that the dispossession of Mother Russia is taking place right now. Listen.
Guys, go back home, because without you here, the people are simply being oppressed and brought to the boiling point. We need to stand up for people. You are needed here. Come back here, guys. Stand up and defend the people. Stop staying fucking silent. Stop just watching this lawlessness that's going on. And appealing to the president is pointless. This is the dispossession of the country's population. They're deliberately destroying livestock brazenly. They just come in, take it away, and put it down. So guys, think again.
Return to your homes and safeguard your beloved families.
But that's not all. That very Russian man says that his relative's son died at the front. The family was given all the information, where and how he died, what hit him. But instead of officially acknowledging his death, they just listed him as missing.
Here in our village, there's a guy who died more than 2 years ago, and he's still listed as missing, even though they also know where and how he died and so on. And no unit will ever go to court on its own to arrange any kind of compensation or anything like that. It all depends on which unit he was in, who the commander was, and so on. So stop spreading this nonsense about by law. By law, if they really know that this person died, then after 6 months, he is officially considered dead. Our relatives were given this information, that he died, this guy, where he died, how they were hit, and what hit them. He wasn't alone there. You see, I know how hard it can be to pull someone out of the trenches, that there really are drones flying around and all that. I know all of this very well. But when there is reliable information that a person has really died, and after 6 months they are supposed to officially declare him dead, but they don't, they just list him as missing because it's more convenient for them, you see, so they don't have to pay out the money.
So families are left alone with these lies for years, while the authorities save money on payouts. Meanwhile, Putin's court oligarch Malofev has started preparing Russians for a defeat by the Ukrainians. But he came up with a brilliant justification for it. Supposedly, Ukrainians are actually Russians, and Russians never lose or surrender. So losing to Ukraine is not shameful. However, how in this logic some Russians can lose to other Russians, Malofev preferred not to explain.
Losing to Ukraine is not shameful. After all, Ukrainians are fundamentally and essentially Russians, sharing the exact same heritage as we do, Tik. And Russians historically have never been known to lose, and absolutely never choose to surrender.
I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they're watching us. The Russians hit the post. During the attack on Odessa, on May 18th, the Russian Federation attacked a Chinese vessel. And this is not just a ship owned by a Chinese citizen. There was a Chinese crew on board during the attack.
This morning, an enemy strike UAV attacked the bulk carrier De Yang, which was at sea near the Odessa region. Once again, Russia is demonstrating that its attacks pose a threat not only to Ukraine, now it's a risk even for its closest partners whose vessels are in the Black Sea.
We can already foresee that the Russian Federation will say it was a monstrous mistake. But such apologies are unlikely to have any effect on Xi Jinping. And one more point to grasp the scale of the situation. Putin already has a visit scheduled for May 21st to Beijing. Just appreciate this diplomatic talent of the Kremlin. Beijing's strategic partner attacks a ship with Chinese nationals on board just days before negotiations. Drones, missiles, and now even aerial bombs. Ukraine's arsenal for striking Russians is constantly expanding, and we also have a powerful upgrade to our military-industrial complex. Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Mikhailo Fedorov, has presented the first Ukrainian-guided aerial bomb. The development of the KAB took 17 months, and it is not a copy of Soviet or Western designs, but a creation by Ukrainian engineers. The bomb's warhead weighs 250 kilograms.
The Ukrainian KAB has a unique design and was created with the realities of modern warfare in mind. This is not a copy of Western or Soviet solutions. but an original development by Ukrainian engineers designed to effectively strike fortifications, command posts, and other enemy targets dozens of kilometers deep after launch.
The Ukrainian Kabaeva is already ready for combat use. The Ministry of Defense has already purchased the first experimental batch. There's no smoke without fire. Rumors about a possible offensive against Ukraine from Belarus have a real basis. The Belarusian dictator himself, having dropped the mask of a neutral peacemaker, announced a partial mobilization of Belarusians and ordered preparations for war. In addition, on May 18th, exercises on the combat use of nuclear weapons began in Belarus. And, as the former head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, stated, Putin wants Lukashenko to fight against Ukraine. And now there are only two questions: the direction of movement and when. How will Ukraine respond to this? Robert Megar-Brovdi has already answered. Details in the report.
Lukashenko has dropped his mask. The Belarusian dictator is preparing a second front for another Russian advance on Kyiv. Rumors about preparations for an invasion have turned into real actions, as personally stated by Volodymyr Zelensky on his social media page.
Russia is considering operational plans for directions to the south and north of Belarusian territory, either against the Chernihiv-Kyiv axis in Ukraine or against one of the NATO countries.
Lukashenko himself is no longer hiding his desire to go to war. At a meeting with Belarusian generals, the Batka made it clear that his army should prepare for an offensive.
There's no way forward without a ground operation.
Thus, Belarus is refusing to conduct large-scale exercises. Instead, partial mobilization is being introduced in the country.
We will selectively mobilize units of the armed forces in order to prepare them for war.
Moreover, Lukashenko is not limiting himself to just Ukraine. According to intelligence, the Belarusian dictator, with the support of the Russian army, is considering the option of invading one of the Baltic countries.
This would involve the seizure of specifically a small portion of territory from one of the Baltic states. And the calculation is based on the idea
It is expected that this seizure will present European countries with a significant dilemma. They must either start a full-scale war with Russia, and in that case see Eastern Europe, at least its major capitals and critical infrastructure, become direct targets for Russian missile and drone attacks, or try to negotiate a truce with an invitation.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are already on alert and are expecting provocations on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. Our defenders have turned Polisia into a fortified defensive line. Now, kilometers of field fortifications, hundreds of revetments for equipment, and firing points have been built there. A branch system of minefields, ditches, and barriers has also been created according to the military. So, a repeat of the February 2022 scenario is not to be expected. And as analysts assure, despite all the maneuvers and loud statements, in reality, Lukashenko is unlikely to dare to attack Ukraine.
There are no significant troop groups on the border with Ukraine, and there is no large-scale mobilization. So for now, all of this exists only at the level of scare tactics. In other words, so far, in reality, we do not see any serious troop formations moving toward the border. We are ready for defense.
But the Belarusian army is clearly not ready for an attack. If Lukashenko gets involved in a military conflict with Ukraine, he could lose his country. And that's not just a figure of speech. When faced with well-trained and highly motivated Ukrainian fighters, his army doesn't stand a chance. On the very first day, hundreds of drones will fly toward Minsk and Gomel, and the regular army will easily cross the border and march toward the Belarusian capital.
And suddenly, Ukraine enters the picture. Several battalion tactical groups move in, forcefully knocking out the professional Marines who are not prepared for defense, but only for invading foreign territory, and crushing the conscript border guards who have never participated in combat at all. And that could be said about the entire Belarusian army.
Not only would the Ukrainian army face little real resistance, but most Belarusians would gladly switch sides to join the Ukrainian armed forces and go on to overthrow their unchanging dictator.
Since Belarus is not huge and its population is quite homogeneous, mobilization, the necessity to die for the Russians, could lead to a repeat of 2020 in the country. That is, to massive protests involving millions, but this time with weapons in hand and without a powerful Russia backing Lukashenko. Because over these years, the Kremlin has squandered all its power, both economic and military.
So all the saber-rattling and loud provocative statements by Lukashenko about an impending war are nothing more than another information psychological operation and a means of exerting pressure, analysts assure. The mustachioed dictator regularly uses military rhetoric whenever he needs to bargain something from Russia: money, benefits, or political support. And that's exactly what's happening this time.
It's clear that Lukashenko will wriggle out of this any way he can, like a hedgehog, a snake, anyone really, because he absolutely does not want to get involved in this war. Belarus's economy has already declined in this first quarter. In Russia, it's 4%. In Belarus, it's 5%. And it will only get worse because they're tied to it. The situation is lousy, although...
Nevertheless, Putin continues to put pressure on Lukashenko.
We continue to observe Russian attempts to further draw Belarus into the war against Ukraine. We know that there have been additional contacts between the Russians and Alexander Lukashenko aimed at convincing him to join new Russian aggressive operations.
So just in case, Ukraine is preparing for the worst, namely to repel an attack from its neighbors. And even though such a scenario is unlikely, it cannot be ruled out.
Russia is deliberately directing Ukrainian drones into NATO countries as a means of pressure. Delphi reports this. Finnish media, citing sources in NATO who say that the Russian armed forces are directing Ukrainian drones over neighboring countries, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, provide the following information. These are attempts to direct drones toward power grid facilities, transportation systems, and military bases. Electronic jammers are used to counter drones, and their effectiveness is enhanced by artificial intelligence-based solutions. According to journalists, for this same reason, the Finnish armed forces have also increased their combat readiness. The latest such alarming signal occurred very recently on the night before Saturday. On Sunday morning, a report came in about a drone that had entered Latvian airspace and later left it. According to NATO sources, Russia's behavior has changed, and now the goal is not only to shoot down Ukrainian drones, but also to cause damage on NATO territory in order to put pressure on alliance countries. And what do you think the Russian Federation is actually planning? The US has reinstated sanctions against Russian oil. As Bloomberg reports, the Trump administration did not extend the license that allowed the sale of some oil subject to sanctions. Previously, Washington made concessions twice in March and April, allowing the export of oil that had already been loaded onto tankers. This was a forced measure amid the fuel crisis caused by the war in Iran and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. For his part, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham announced new American sanctions against Russia. The new restrictive measures will target Russian oil and its importers. In particular, the initiative proposes the introduction of a 20% tariff on goods from those countries that purchase Russian oil in circumvention of the bans and do not help Ukraine. The politician noted that the sanctions will also target the Russian shadow fleet. According to the Republican, work on this bill is progressing.
We are very close to Congress passing sanctions that will allow the president to impose tariffs and sanctions against the shadow fleet.
And any country that buys cheap Russian oil to support Putin and does not help Ukraine may be subjected to tariffs. President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on India for purchasing Russian oil. There will come a time when China will have to be held accountable for its actions.
Graham is considered one of Donald Trump's main allies in the Senate and a proponent of tough pressure on the Kremlin. In February 2024, Roscosmos added Lindsey Graham to the list of terrorists and extremists. And what do you think about this news from the Americans? Write your thoughts in the comments. I'll definitely read them. Every year brings a new scandal. On Saturday, the Eurovision final made headlines. Bulgaria won, represented by Dara with the song Bangaranga. This is Bulgaria's first victory in 14 years of participating in the song contest. So where's the scandal? Honestly, I don't even know where to begin. First of all, the Bulgarians had help preparing their performance from Philip Kirkorov, the very same Putin-supporting singer. Philip himself shared that he lent a hand in preparing the act.
Naturally, when Bulgarian television approached me with a request to, let's say, support Bulgaria this year, I couldn't deny myself the pleasure. So we began preparations, chose a singer, and started getting ready for the Bulgarian national selection. She's a wonderful singer. She once won The Voice. In our opinion, she's young, but she had one problem. She didn't have a hit song. That's how it goes sometimes. She had the voice, the looks, so she could dance, but she didn't have a hit. So, well, we saw potential in her.
Moreover, Bulgaria's winning song was written by Dimitris Konopoulos, a pro-Russian associate of Kirkorov. But that's not all, because besides talking about the motherland, Kirkorov made another brilliant statement. He said that Bulgaria is the 16th Republic of Russia, and that Bulgarians really miss the Russian Federation.
So that's the kind of interesting story we have here with our work this year. I think that everyone who will be watching Eurovision now, I suggest we root for our dream team, for Dara, for Bulgaria. After all, no matter how you look at it, Bulgaria was and remains our 16th republic. Bulgarians really love Russians. They really miss Russia because right now the government's policy is all European. And in my opinion, they're going a bit overboard in their attitude toward us. But again, music knows no boundaries.
Neither the official Bulgarian broadcaster, which supposedly asked Kirkorov for help with preparations, nor the singer Dara have commented on the Russian singer's statement. But even without official comments, everything is clear. First of all, Dara, also known as Darina Yotova, follows Filip Kirkorov on Instagram. There is another very telling detail on the Bulgarian singer's Instagram. In 2025, a post featuring that very Zidet appeared on her Instagram page. And now the cherry on top of Eurovision, Russia may return to the song contest. According to Eurovision's executive director Martin Green, Russia was not suspended from participating in the contest because of the war in Ukraine, so theoretically it could return. I have no words, at least none that are suitable for broadcast. Exactly. And please don't hold back in the comments. And now, attention, just try not to laugh. Details have emerged about the entrepreneur who seized the throne in Russia's Hermitage. But let's take it step by step. Let me remind you, on Sunday, May 17th, during the day, 45-year-old Alexander entered the Grand Throne Hall of the Winter Palace, climbed onto the dais, and began telling those present about his unfortunate fate. He was reading from sheets of paper he had brought with him, and when a Hermitage staff member tried to remove him, he grabbed some knives. Emergency services note that the man even managed to sit on the large imperial throne.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, I know that you bear a great responsibility for preservation and face major challenges at every moment, just as I do, 24 hours a day and not a moment more. But there are no small things, and we need to look into the legality. I'm not used to losing or giving up on what I've set out to do, no matter how grandiose it may sound, making the world a better place.
According to Fontanka, Alexander was born in Leningrad and is registered in the village of Gorbunki, Lomonosovsky district. The man has 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Alexander is a former entrepreneur. He had at least 4 business projects. Some of the companies have been liquidated, and the IT firm ended the 2025 financial year with losses. On social media, the man actively criticizes the local authorities. The media reports that in the future, he may have to pay for such a striking performance. By the way, in March, a court ordered another visitor to the Hermitage to pay more than 800,000 rubles, almost 500,000 hryvnias, for sitting on the throne of the Grand Master of the Order of Malta and damaging the upholstery. Well, what can I say? Whatever you may think, it was beautiful. Ksenia Sobchak complained that Russians have been banned from publishing videos of missile strikes. According to her, because of this, Russians have started to watch Ukrainian media and Russian opposition channels en masse.
Brilliant. Now people go online to read emigre and Ukrainian media because Russian media are forbidden to report on the strikes. The task of promoting foreign and pro-Ukrainian resources has been accomplished 10 out of 10. It's a good thing there won't be any internet soon, and people won't find out anything at all anymore.
The Telegram channel of Ukrainian journalist and war correspondent Andriy Tsaplienko reports that, in fact, the number of subscribers to their channel and other Ukrainian channels has indeed increased slightly. Well, go ahead, read. Maybe at least this way people will come to their senses faster. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've got another betrayal on our hands. Unfortunately, Russian gymnasts have been allowed to compete at events with their flag and anthem. Yes, you heard that right. The Executive Committee of the International Gymnastics Federation, following its meeting held from May 16th to 18th, decided to lift all restrictions on Russian and Belarusian athletes that had been in place since February 2022. The decision takes effect immediately. This means that Russian gymnasts, the federation includes both artistic and rhythmic gymnastics, will be able to compete at international events with their flag and anthem. However, to participate in the Olympics, a separate permit from the International Olympic Committee will be required. What do you think of this news? Leave your comments. And right now, here's another cringe-worthy moment from across the border. Honestly, I thought I had seen everything, but apparently not. Just listen to this. Roscosmos has started placing advertisements on rockets due to financial problems. This was reported by Russian media. According to the corporation's management, after the war began, the Russian Federation lost about 2 billion in revenue in the space sector. The total losses of Roscosmos from 2020 to 2024 exceeded $1,200 million. In 2025, Russia carried out only 17 space launches. This is one of the worst results since Gagarin's flight. For comparison, the United States conducted 181 launches in a year and China 91. What can I say? Against this backdrop, Russia risks losing its status as one of the world's leading space powers. And what do you think about all this cringe with advertising on rockets? Write your thoughts, don't hold back in the comments. Donald Trump's mental health is now causing concern not only among his opponents, but even among his fellow Republicans. This is one of the reasons for the increased preparations for a transfer of power. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is being named as the likely successor. If this scenario actually comes to pass in the future, what exactly will the implications be for both Ukraine and Russia?
Donald Trump is likely suffering from a mental disorder, but he refuses to undergo a medical examination. There is still no official diagnosis, reports the German publication Zeit, which puts the overall governance of the United States at risk. A new wave of discussion was sparked by an incident in the Oval Office during a recent event dedicated to maternal health. Trump simply fell asleep in front of a huge crowd. At the same time, the White House, commenting on photos of the president with his eyes closed, claimed that in the pictures, the leader was simply blinking. By the way, this is far from the first time that Donald's team has had to justify his physical condition.
This is a minor irritation of the soft tissues from frequent handshakes and aspirin, which is taken as part of a standard cardiovascular disease prevention program. This is a well-known and harmless side effect of aspirin therapy. The president remains in excellent health, which I think you all see every day.
But Americans see something different, which they regularly report on social media. In recent months, Trump has been displaying increasingly contradictory behavior. He makes sharp political statements, threatens to destroy other countries, gives strange public speeches, and shows signs of physical fatigue.
Swollen ankles, bruises on his arms that they try to cover up with makeup, dragging his right leg, which he then swings forward. Constant cognitive tests, which Trump for some reason keeps bragging about, even though we still don't understand why he is tested for cognitive abilities so often.
Analysts note that Trump's team has now faced the same campaign tactics they once used themselves when Republicans mocked Joe Biden's health in unison.
And now suddenly they don't want that for Trump. They don't like it. They say, that's enough, calm down, stop asking questions. 3 annual medical checkups in 8 months, 3 visits to the dentist in 5 months. Stop making assumptions. This is irresponsible.
But what most people consider irresponsible is something else, leaving the US without leadership or entrusting it to a sick person. That's why, as early as 2 years before the end of Trump's term, active discussions began about his successor.
Marco Rubio will try to run for president. He has a non-profit or, well, super PAC organizations that continue to operate just in case they're needed.
Trump himself also spoke about Rubio's presidential prospects in his recent interview with The Hill. There he called a Rubio-Vance team the ideal choice for Republicans in the 2028 elections. At the same time, the guarantor refrained from directly endorsing any of the candidates. When weighing each of their chances of becoming president of the United States, it's worth noting that Vance supports Trump's position too actively, always and in everything. And considering that the current guarantor's approval rating is relentlessly declining, he will obviously drag J.D. Vance down with him.
His support is fading, his MAGA supporters are fighting among themselves. Republicans are running to the Democrats not because the Democrats are wonderful, but because Trump is terrible. Democrats are winning in almost every election.
According to recent polls, Marco Rubio has increased his popularity by as much as 12 times. If Americans were to vote today, every third person would cast their vote for him. At the same time, the Secretary of State's position on Ukraine played a significant role in his recognition by Americans.
Rubio once again speaks out against Witkoff and Kushner, stating that security guarantees for Ukraine are the top priority. Not business deals, not giving up Donetsk, and not weakening Ukraine from a military standpoint. The priority is security guarantees. So Marco Rubio is still resisting Witkoff, Kushner, and the man behind them, Vice President J.D. Vance.
And since there are at least 2 years until the elections, experts are betting that Trump, like his protege Vance, will manage to alienate enough Americans for a politician with a pro-European and pro-Ukrainian agenda to win.
Right now we are in a state of a fairly cold war.
With our government, which is trying to turn this country upside down, they've made us an ally of Russia. And this, even more than the situation in Ukraine itself, deeply troubles and profoundly unsettles a significant number of people across America. Because there are specific, deeply rooted issues that inevitably provoke a powerful emotional response. And friendship with Russia is very strange for America.
The immediate results of such US policies will obviously be seen as early as this November, when the House of Representatives elections take place in the States. Already today, analysts are predicting a complete failure for both Trump himself and all his direct political supporters.
NABU and SAP are preparing to arrest Olena Zelenska. Russia is inflating a new large-scale fake. Kremlin propaganda outlets are spreading stories that the anti-corruption agency is investigating a case against the First Lady of Ukraine.
On May 17th, RIA Novosti, citing sources in Russian law enforcement agencies, reported that SAP and NABU are allegedly preparing to arrest the First Lady of Ukraine. The Russian media claims that, because of this, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has allegedly increased security for his family, and his political strategists are advising him to publicly separate from his wife as much as possible.
NABU and SAP, of course, refute the Russian insiders, insisting that this is yet another wave of a disinformation campaign.
This information does not correspond to reality. NABU and SAP are not carrying out any procedural actions mentioned in these fabricated reports. Such information dumps are part of a systematic disinformation campaign by the aggressor state aimed at discrediting Ukrainian institutions, undermining trust in anti-corruption agencies, destabilizing the socio-political situation, and weakening Ukraine's unity in the context of full-scale war.
To be honest, after the Russians tried to convince the world that Olena Zelenska was buying Cartier and Bugatti for millions of dollars, we're not particularly surprised by such fakes anymore. And once again, we remind you about information hygiene. Verify information from multiple sources, especially if the news sounds very scandalous and sensational. Nuclear weapons are once again in the spotlight. Russia is building up its capabilities and continues to issue threats. But while Putin is resorting to nuclear blackmail, his army is preparing a new offensive. According to Ukrainian intelligence, Russia is currently actively considering plans for military operations against the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction from the territory of Belarus, as well as working out scenarios for an attack on one of the NATO countries. How realistic is a new large-scale assault? And is Moscow truly ready to cross the nuclear line? Ukrainian special services gave a clear answer. The enemy has the technical capability, but the decisive factor remains the Kremlin's political decision. So what is really behind Moscow's loud statements, and what should we be preparing for next? We discussed this in our report.
Russia is capable of launching a nuclear strike at any moment and at any distance. This was stated by the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov. But he immediately adds, this is not a matter of technical capability, but of a political decision. And most importantly, there are currently no signs of preparations for such a strike.
Scare tactics regarding nuclear weapons. This was back in 2022 when Medvedev was openly telling everyone that God forbid anything hits Crimea, there would be a nuclear strike on Ukraine or even on Europe, something like that. Well, the first strikes did happen. I remember on August 9th, 2022, the first missiles hit. Then the SBU launched their Sea Baby drones into Sevastopol Bay, and there was much more after that. That's why we'll keep hearing this from time to time, because the Russians have no other argument.
Nevertheless, Russia's nuclear potential remains a serious threat. Analysts note that Moscow is ramping up its capabilities at the fastest pace since the Cold War. This concerns not only missiles, but also the overall strengthening of military presence near NATO's borders. Russian authorities are also actively employing nuclear rhetoric. In particular, Vladimir Putin has spoken about the need to ensure strategic security and has mentioned new missile systems capable of carrying nuclear warheads. According to experts, such statements are a form of pressure and intimidation.
Risks of using nuclear weapons. Well, such risks always exist. But I think we need to understand a simple thing. If the Russians believed that using tactical nuclear weapons would immediately lead to Ukraine's surrender and that they would face no consequences for it, say, from China, the US, or other nuclear states, then they would have done it long ago. So we will keep hearing this. But I think that first and foremost, China is categorically against this, and they have honestly warned the Russians not to mess around.
At the same time, Russia is preparing new strikes against Ukraine. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian intelligence has obtained documents indicating preparations for missile and drone attacks. Among the targets are nearly 24 sites, including political centers and military posts. Ukraine is already responding. The defense forces are strengthening protection and are also preparing both military and sanctions-based responses. The president notes every Russian strike will have consequences. At the same time, there remains another risk from Belarus. According to Ukrainian authorities, Russia is trying to involve Minsk in new operations. We are talking about possible actions both against Ukraine, particularly in the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction, and against NATO countries. Infrastructure is already being created on the territory of Belarus that could be used for an offensive. However, according to Ukrainian border guards, there are not enough forces there for a full-scale attack. Despite all the threats, Ukrainian authorities emphasize that the key factor remains the state's ability to resist, because it is this, and not attempts at intimidation, that determines the real balance of power and the course of the war. Ukraine will undoubtedly defend itself and its people if Alexander Lukashenko makes a mistake and decides to support this Russian intention as well.
They will keep firing until the end of the war. Our task, well, what strong leverage do we have? Here, it's really only about responding with retaliatory strikes to destroy oil and gas infrastructure, and much more, just to collapse the Russian economy.
Therefore, the nuclear scenario remains possible, but not inevitable. Russia continues to exert pressure, threaten, and prepare new strikes. But the decisive factor still remains not weapons, but political decisions and Ukraine's ability to defend itself.
And now we have a new sex scandal in politics, though not in Ukrainian politics, but in British. A deputy from the far-right Reform UK party resigned just a few weeks. Actually, not even weeks, but a week, after winning in the local elections because of appearing in pornography. Stephen Masdell, the newly elected councillor of St Helens in the UK, filmed erotic videos with his partner and posted them on the OnlyFans platform. If he weren't a deputy, the fact that there were 18-plus videos wouldn't have interested anyone. But here, as you can imagine, there are questions.
Journalists discovered that the councillor appeared in many porn videos under the pseudonym Lachlan Taylor UK. This caused a scandal and, according to him, put him under enormous pressure. According to him, he was offered to apologize and stop this activity in order to remain a councillor, but he refused. Recently, information about me and my partner has come to light. We have always been open about this and are not ashamed of what we do. There is nothing shameful about it, and I am proud to be a gay man in this community.
In the end, Stephen Masdell resigned. He himself says that in his posts on social media and on the paid site OnlyFans, he adhered to social media policies and the UK Online Safety Act. So he did not harm anyone. His party stated, and I quote, "It is sad to see that media harassment has forced an elected official to leave his post because of his personal life." In turn, the representative of the Labour Party, who lost in the same district, said that Masdell's personal life is none of her business.
The concern is not related to Masdell's sexual orientation or personal life, but to the fact that the content was publicly posted on a platform that is easily accessible to children and young people.
Meanwhile, our deputies are caught for corruption. Such contrasts. Leave your comments. That's all for now. Give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you next time.